Thank
Thanks.
you.
So we are joining here from many different places across Canada. And I think this project, Architects Against Housing Alienation, has from the beginning been thinking hard about the relationship between Indigenous housing issues in Canada and settler housing issues. And within the organizing committee, we have uh, Métis and Niska um, architects, and Patrick Stewart, who's not here at the moment, but hopefully will be joining us, um, made this map where he looks at all of Canada and thinks about how much of Canada is Crown land and how that Crown land needs to be repositioned and regoverned by the Indigenous nations, which nations and other groups that live on those lands and whose lands are their traditional territories. And so I think as we move forward with this work, we need to be thinking always about the Indigenous land relations and the dispossession of Indigenous lands within Canada. So hopefully we can do this work with a project towards reconciliation. And I'm not mentioning specific groups because we're coming from so many different places in the country. So in different ways, I think all of us should be thinking about how this project to end housing alienation in Canada starts with reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, and that means not just recognition, but also land back and transfer of lands and the control of lands by Indigenous peoples. So we've had one term and we've had of this Superstudio, and we've had a number of interesting lectures. We're going to have a much even more robust lecture series in the winter term with many of the participants. Some of the participants in the fall term are continuing into the winter term, and they'll be doing their lectures then. So we're going to look at 7 studios today. Two of the studios, Manitoba and Athabasca, their work is ongoing, so they won't be presenting today. But the other 7 have work, and I'm really excited to see what everybody's been doing. So we're going to start with Ben Gianni and the Carleton studio.
Thanks so much, everybody. It's a delight to be here. I, Adrian, this is not I've been sort of updating things at the last minute. I don't think this is the most updated slide. Is there, is it possible to see the one that's actually still online?
This is from online.
Oh, okay. Let me just open oh, that's all right. Oh, let me try to open.
Maybe
Yeah, we're missing
maybe
an
if it
image on
maybe if
this.
it's reloaded, perhaps.
Let me just see here.
I mean, I can try. How do I do that?
Yeah, the one online has oh, I see. No, you're right. It's, I don't know. Okay, just go to the next slide. That's it. That's what screwed me up here. Next slide, please.
Two slides. Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, okay.
No, I get it. There we go. That's the one with the nice image. Um, and great. So I'm going to read a little bit here with the idea that I'll move a little bit more quickly if I read. So at Carleton, the housing studio is our comprehensive studio, and it's offered every year, and it's mandatory for all 90 of our fourth year undergrads. And the studio is divided into 6 groups, typically, each with its own instructors. And this year we looked at 4 different sites, 2 groups each for 2 of the sites, and 1 group each for the other 2 sites. Today we're only going to look at one of the sites. There's just well, with 90 projects, there's a lot to show. So this year we partnered with Ottawa Community Housing, with the City of Ottawa, and a local not-for-profit, namely the Vanier Community Services Center. And all of the sites involved a mix of both market and social housing at various levels of affordability. And we tend to work on sites large enough to accommodate multiple buildings in order to emphasize what we call city building and placemaking. In this context, buildings often form the backdrops to courtyards, to plazas, and to public spaces rather than drawing attention to themselves. And we often describe this as buildings as fabric rather than as figures, although in most projects, several buildings do stand out, largely due to their height. So next slide. So I'm going to quickly run through 5 projects that were produced for one of our sites, and this site is 100 Constellation Avenue, on which we worked with the city of Ottawa. And this is a large 4-hectare site currently comprising some 6 parking lots. And notably, it's immediately adjacent to a transit stop, which is the new terminus for the city's extended LRT system. And it's just across the road from Algonquin College, which some 60,000 students are enrolled. So lots going on the site. If you're looking at this plan here, you see Algonquin College there off to the right. Right above it is College Square, which is a large commercial plaza, has a big Loblaws, has a Home Depot, a bunch of outbuildings. And then directly around our site is a high school, an old city hall. Before Ottawa was amalgamated, this area was called Nepean. It's still called Nepean, but Nepean had its own city hall there. It's now part of the city of Ottawa. And then there's Mary Pitt Center, which is a large office building which is used by the city of Ottawa. So that's a little bit of the context. Next slide. Yeah, this is the thing of beauty that we had to deal with. So it's 6 parking lots, which you see there, and they're directly adjacent to this transit stop. Oh, no, go back. There we go. Directly. So this is a drone image. Yeah, it's a bit of a wasteland right now. This is a drone image that some of the students took drone footage. You can see Charbel and Yosef down there in the lower right, a photograph taken by the drone as they were operating it. So the context is sort of non-existent, and the challenge here was to turn nothing into something. Okay, next slide. So as a TOD site, or a transit-oriented design site, the city of Ottawa is pushing for very high densities and encouraging buildings up to 40 stories. As a city-owned property, it's anticipated that the site will accommodate a large number of social housing units, possibly up to 40% of the site will be social housing. And 10% of the site is also to be reserved for a city-owned park. Based on the city's targets for TOD sites, we estimated and asked the students to accommodate some 1,500 units. So again, this is really straddling the line between housing and urban design. Now, the students began the studio with a precedent analysis and a unit design exercise. And then they pair up to create master plans on which they spend about a month. And from there, each student chooses one of the buildings in their master plans to develop at the building scale. And in the final phase of the studio, students are expected to produce a detailed constructional model of their building to explore the overall building structure and building envelope. So this pair of students, Karen and Carter Colnut, who happen to be cousins, it's a lot of C's, pulled off an extremely sophisticated urban plan, dividing the site into a series of districts organized around 2 public spaces, namely a hardscaped plaza opposite the transit station, with some commercial around it, and a large central park. And while it was necessary to incorporate 3 towers into the overall design to reach their density targets, they all sit on mid-rise plinths, most of which include townhouses at grade. So the challenge when you're dealing with high density is to try to get as much family-friendly housing at or close to grade as possible. So in almost all cases, the students have multiple building unit types in their buildings, and at grade, there are towns. So next slide. Zooming in, we see an image of the building that Karen developed. And at grade, it's a series of townhouses that wrap around a 2-story parking structure. And beginning at level 3, the parking structure plinth becomes a courtyard around which she has organized a sequence of mid-rise buildings. And at the northwest corner of this complex, it's hard to call it a building, but it's actually 4 or 5 buildings all pulled together. You can see that she has integrated a tower. And you'll note that the raised courtyard connects down and into the adjacent park with a series of stairs. So you can see that diagonal coming out at us from the top of that plinth down into the adjacent park. Next slide. So on this slide, we see plans of the various levels of this particular building complex, as well as the sectional constructional model that she produced for phase 3. So Karen experimented with a number of different unit types, including through units that are accessed from the corridor floors above and below. And portions of the mid-rise are double loaded while others are single loaded. So at the ground floor plan, you can see it's townhouses wrapped around the parking structure. At the first upper level is the second level of those towns, again, wrapped around the parking structure. When we get to plinth level, it switches to through units, and you'll notice there are no corridors at this level. If we look at level 4, you'll see there are the corridors through which those through units are accessed. So what Karen wanted to do, for instance, here was to make sure that there were very large units at the plinth level that could accommodate families and had access to the play space directly at the plinth. So in both the double loaded and the single loaded portions of the building, she used a skip stop configuration with corridors on every other floor. And then finally, you see the tower plan there. I think the tower goes up about 30 stories, and it's just a pretty typical tower plan. And then this is the only time I'm going to show plans, but just to show you that the students do have to develop things in really great detail. And then there's an example of her constructional section model, which she took through the mid-rise portion of the building, and you can see the 2 levels of parking there. Okay, now this pair of students took a completely different approach by attempting to solve an urban design problem with a single building. And while I normally discouraged and nudge students away from mega projects, this pair make a compelling case for architecture at the urban scale. They wrap the entire 4-hectare site with a single building, which spirals up to a peak. And they also embed indoor and outdoor amenity spaces in and under the courtyard, which is fractured and sloped to provide light and access into the spaces below it. Next slide.
Ben,
Go
about
ahead.
8 minutes right now. So
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Adrian.
you're at about 8 minutes. So if you could wrap up in a couple of minutes, that would be great.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's just, yeah. All right. Yeah. We'll go real quickly here. All right. Let's just keep going. We'll just run through the slides. Another site plan slide. View of the park in the site plan and the 2 buildings, the tower on the left that one of the students designed, and you can see the mid-rises on the right that the other student designed. Next slide. These are images of the tower, including a view of the tower coming in, or view into the site from the transit plaza. And you can see the role that the tower plays in kind of guiding us into the site. And then there's just some views at the bottom of the development of the base of the tower. Next slide. And then these are views of the mid-rise building that the other student designed, and some views at the bottom of those mid-rise buildings, including a kind of close-up of the way the elevation is designed. Next slide. Another very good urban design project where the tower forms a kind of totemic, plays a kind of totemic role in the overall complex. There are actually 3 towers in this complex, but this one sits kind of quite close to the center of the site, and it sits on a very long mid-rise block, which is the green building you see at the base of the tower. Next slide. And here's the overall site plan. It shows, again, the entrance into it from the transit station. Again, the tower plays a key role. You get a peek of it as you're coming in from the transit station. And the 2 buildings that they've done, building A is the tower and that long block of mid-rise, and building B are something we've been experimenting in the studio, which is BC-inspired single exit stair buildings, which have a narrower profile and a greater opportunity for cross ventilation and through units. In this particular case, the students designed the park as a sort of a linear swath of green that kind of snakes through the site there. So you can see it between the red buildings and the white buildings to the right. Next slide. This is an overall view of the site. Transit station is at the bottom to the left, and that kind of hardscape plaza into the site, and then the tower sitting there. You see the mid-rise plinth under the tower, that long piece there, and then the second building are organized around an interior courtyard. Those are the single exit stair buildings. Next slide. There's a view into the site from the transit station. So again, the tower kind of welcomes you into the site. Next slide. And then these are views of those single exit stair buildings. On the right, there's a view from the outside of the block. So they actually wrap around and form a block. And on the left is a view in the interior courtyard of that block. Next slide. And then finally, just to end with this was a sort of hybrid project where the students were equally interested in buildings as architecture and urban design. So you can see a very high level of detail went into the design of these buildings. And we're looking at two buildings there. One on the two buildings there, the kind of V-shaped building on the lower side and the more blocky building on the left. Next slide. And this is the final slide. It's just showing a picture of those two buildings as they flank a large plaza, which is facing onto the transit plaza and welcoming us into the site. And that plaza is designed to accommodate a variety of different things, including a farmer's market. And that's all from Carlton.
Thanks so much, Carlton. Amazing. Karen Kuby, I don't think is able to be here. So I'm going to risk this and try showing a video that Karen sent us. Can you hear this?
I'm Karen Kuby, and very
Yes.
happy to be presenting to you today in absentia. So the course that I have the pleasure of teaching at Daniels at the University of Toronto is a year-long, third-year MArch course called Architecture and the Right to Housing. So our starting point is that housing is a human right. And what we're doing in this course is reading the right to housing legal framework, which has been codified internationally since 1948 and has been law in Canada since 2019, reading that legal framework as an architectural one. That means looking at these 7 aspects as architectural concerns and asserting that there's no way to fully realize the needs of residents without exploring the spatial and architectural dimensions of things like cultural adequacy and accessibility, etc. So we are exploring through our design projects, what does right to housing mean in practice, and how can architects or architecture contribute? So here's how we've organized the course. This first semester, the fall semester, we meet as a seminar, which I run like a reading group. So our first 3 weeks, we're introducing the students to the idea of the right to housing and to the housing system. I read the same 2 readings as everyone else for the beginning. And then what we did is we went into the Superstudio principles. So each week was, organized under one of those, doing readings around that. And then finishing up with the aspects of the right to housing. So looking at readings connected to specific aspects of that right. And this is what the schedule starts to look like. So every week there were about 2 readings that everyone did. And the student whose turn it was to present readings also did one additional one. And each week a student would lead the discussion and get things going in class. But before class even started, we were also doing these readings together on a Miro board. So you can see what I did is I posted PDFs of the readings on the virtual board, and students were underlining, adding sticky notes, and part of the assignment is to be in conversation with each other before we get into the classroom. And you can see what they also do is they also start to bring in some of their own material that they're connecting to the readings. So throughout the semester, we're doing readings, we're having these discussions, both virtually and in the classroom. And in the first half of the semester, we also produced a joint research document, and we can share that. We're figuring out a way to share that. The right to housing and architecture toward the end of housing alienation. So this is how that was organized, looking at the state of the right to housing in Canada, what's up with the National Legal Framework from 2017 and 2019, what's happening with national policy, with Carney, et cetera, and what are responses by civil society. And then in part two, the students were looking at case studies that we felt connected to some of those Superstudio aspects. I should say I feel very grateful. I've had the chance to teach versions of this class a few times. So students this semester were building on research projects produced by previous cohorts. So just a taste of that booklet. Part of the National Housing Strategy in Canada is the establishing of the Federal Housing Advocate, puts out important reports that looks at how the right to housing is being upheld or not in different contexts for different people. We know this law is pretty new and it's being tested. Then looking at what's going on nationally, and this of course is evolving day by day. And understanding that it's certainly not just government, and looking at civil society organizations nationally and in Ontario and how they are responding. And this is an example of the first page of one of the case studies. So what does it look like to decommodify housing? An example of blocks from our school. So that's what we've done this semester, and I'm not showing you actually the bulk of the work, which is the students each producing a brief for themselves. Next semester, my 10 students will each produce a design project that extends from research they've been doing this term. So we have 10 amazing projects that will be produced, and it's a great pleasure to work with these amazing students and to be a part of this Superstudio. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thanks, Karen. So, next, we're going to jump to TMU and Rob.
Awesome. Thank you, Adrian. Here we go. Perfect. Hi, everyone. So this semester, I was teaching similar to Karen's course at Daniels. This was a seminar elective, so it was for second year MArch students and fourth year undergrad BArch-Sci students. A course that I call Everything is Housing. So if you go to the next slide, I'll kind of give a brief overview of what it was we talked about. We kind of broke the semester into pre-reading week and post-reading week. And so in season one, we talked about building housing. We talked about the history of housing in Toronto over the last 13,000 years. We talked about the financialization of housing, kind of development 101. What's the process by which housing is typically created and created at scale? We then went into building more housing. So how does this start to kind of impact the city? How do different building typologies relate to one another? And that was the history of planning in Toronto. So we kind of taking this a reasonably local approach to understanding some of these challenges and why a lot of the systems that we have and work in and deal with exist as they do. Building more housing while polluting less. That one was about carbon emissions and analysis. So understanding this sort of very challenging situation by which we need to build many million more units of housing while also somehow polluting less than we currently are as a country. Talking a little bit about what it means to try to use what we have and make the most of the materials that currently exist is reuse and circularity. And then finishing off season one with building a continuum of housing, which was kind of all about shelter and the process by which moving someone from an encampment through the different steps of housing that they're able to accept and able to kind of work within based on their individual circumstance, all the way into affordable housing, supportive housing, and onto typical housing. So the first half of the course was really focused on what are some of the major challenges that we face. Broadly, we were looking at the idea of the housing crisis, the homelessness crisis, which is different than the housing crisis because it has kind of a toxic drug component, and there's a lot more kind of acute challenges that folks face. The climate crisis and a kind of crisis of connection in an alienated world. And so we looked at these four different crises through the lens of housing in Toronto and the history of building here. The back half of the course, season 2, if you will, was about how might we move forward. What are some things that we can start to kind of think about and consider at a high level? It's much more of a breadth than a depth situation. But how can we think some of these things through? So we started with land, thinking about what it means to have a site, models of ownership over that site, who gets to make decisions about this, how we steward these decisions, how we share the ability to decide what happens on the land on which we live. We went from the site to the building, so kind of respecting floor area, and that's how do we think about how many people live in a certain amount of space, the shared amenities that people might have, being able to make use of things that already are there. Delivery, so that's thinking about how we're able to move towards mass timber and more modularity types of housing delivery that can be quite fast. And then we did a lecture on respecting the past, which was basically modernity and kind of the utopian futures and visions of a better world that we've seen in the early 1900s and the mid 1900s and the late 1900s, and how those things might relate to where we are today, and these types of conversations about the future of architecture. And then we kind of had a wrap up lecture, and the final week of the course, if you go to the next slide here, was based on the term assignment. So the term project that students worked through. There was an initial project called My House, where they started to kind of think about where they live through a series of prompts just to kind of get going at the start of the term. But the majority of the semester was about was a large term project broken into chunks. So the first one, questions on housing. Students were asked to provide 3 big questions that they might want to explore over the course of the term. And these are things that are genuinely interesting to them, like things that they, for themselves, want to know. And from here, we kind of moved on to, I gave them some guidance about, okay, if you go this route with this question, you can start to explore these topics. You rephrase this question, maybe you'll be able to explore something over here. They then chose a subject, a topic that they wanted to explore in more detail. They did kind of a deep research dive. That was meditations. Arguments on housing. They kind of took a stance on this topic. They basically wrote a thesis statement in response to this idea and tried to kind of form their own opinion about this thing that they themselves wanted to learn. And then they illustrated this and presented it in the form of a zine. And so if you go to the next page, we've got some, oh yeah, right. So we've got some of the questions that they did. So there were 48 students in the class. And the questions were pretty wide ranging. These are some of the ones that I particularly liked. How can dwellings adapt to someone throughout their life cycle? How much space should we be allocated in a home? Like, how much space should a person need to live? Like, they're meant to be very large questions that don't necessarily have a right or wrong answer, but something that someone can really kind of dig into. So if you go to the next slide, this culminated in an exhibition, which we called House as a Verb. It was all about how do we approach the act of housing, where housing is not just an object. Yeah. Oh, okay.
Apologies, Robert. I didn't mean to say that out loud. Go ahead.
No worries. How do we kind of approach this not just as an object, but as an act? And what does that mean? So this exhibition happened at the end of November. And if you go to the next couple slides, I've got some photos. So we started with a wall of all of the questions. All 48 of the students' questions were kind of displayed large on this wall. And then if you go to the next slide here, we also built a structure in front of the wall, which kind of held these zines. It was the kind of a beacon to draw people in, but broadly was meant to just be something to support and hold these for people to have a look at. So this is students and I working on building this structure. And we've got some photos of kind of what that looks like with the zines there and actually built. If you go to the next couple slides, you'll see a couple of examples of some really good ones. Moira's is in the middle here, rethinking micro living. If you go to the next slide, yeah, Kyle's is here, which was about whether Euclidean zoning is the right solution in Toronto. And he had this kind of secondary story about someone looking to open a barber shop in a residential neighborhood and finding that that's not possible with our current zoning. If you go to the next slide, I've got an example of, yeah, this was Miriam's zine, which was why build for resilience when housing needs are urgent? And she was kind of exploring this tension between building quickly and building well, and kind of how we're able to just try to provide the necessary things to get people who are unhoused, experiencing chronic homelessness out of the cold, and also provide something that helps them break the cycle of homelessness and not just be kind of stuck in it with a life raft situation. So she explored that tension in her zine. It was a beautiful project. And if you go to the next couple slides, we just got a few photos of the exhibition. So there were quite a few folks who were able to kind of come out and see the whole project. You can see the image on the left. The structure is made half of new material and half of reclaimed lumber. I had several guest lectures come in over the course of the term. One of them was Meredith Moore from Ouroboros Deconstruction, and she just got the first Create.to project in the city where she was able to dismantle an old building. And so we were able to take that wood and use it for the exhibition, which was quite fun. So that was Everything is Housing.
Thanks so much, Rob. So I'm going to present my studio. I didn't obey my rules about 16 slides, but luckily I'm in control of the slides, so it's my responsibility to move them quickly. We'll see how that goes. So our studio was called Infill as Relational Architecture, and we collaborated with the Kensington Community Land Trust, Kensington Market Community Land Trust, sorry. And it's a third-year studio. It had 15 students. It's what option studio in our sequence. And the concept of infill is something that is very dear to my heart. But interestingly, when we started initial conversations with the Land Trust, the research committee, who we collaborated with primarily, was very interested already in the question of infill housing in Kensington. And so it became a really good common theme for the work. And one of the things that they're reacting against very strongly are encroachments on the edges of Kensington that completely disrespect the Heritage District. So the Heritage District requires low-rise construction, and this is a proposal that went to City Hall yesterday. It's taller than the other 53-meter buildings which are being built around Kensington along College Street and the other major streets that surround the superblock. And Dominique Russell, who's the co-director of this KMCLT, has been fighting this building for quite a while. It's student housing, but it's micro units and it's way overscaled. And you can see it's like a shear wall against the next building. It has windows in it because they have the air rights for the next building, but the urban form is very crude. So this is a negative example. And so we're trying to think about two kinds of infill. Urban infill, which Peter Marcuse, who we read at the beginning of term, says is the opposite of slum clearance and displacement. It represents the integration of buildings and their residents into the existing fabric, not their separation and exclusion. And on the right-hand side are images of our class trip to Kensington, where we saw pre-existing examples of infill, where you have residential fabric in the mid-block condition. So like laneway housing, but here you have fragments of real streets in the mid-block condition. But we're also interested in architectural infill, and we're thinking of John Hebracken's sort of dialectic of support and infill, where support are the permanent elements of the building, and infill are things that are movable or changeable in time. And these images of our tour show additions to buildings which are so key to Kensington. They're kind of even the logo of the KMCLT shows this example, where awnings are infilled to create buildings in front of buildings. And this is it's a kind of urban infill, but I think it's at the architectural scale, and we're interested in both architectural and urban infills. So the first project was a research project which looked at the three forms of alienation that Architects Against Housing Alienation talks about. Ecological alienation from our ecological world, alienation from our social milieu, and alienation from our own creative agency. And so some students looked at the flora and fauna of the Kensington market, showing connections and disconnections. Um, some looked at metabolic relations. What are the inputs and outputs of the neighborhood? Other students looked at carbon and material use and tried to model the entire embodied carbon within Kensington Market through a set of approximations. Other students looked at the changes in land division and built form over time, following the work of George Baird. Other students looked at zoning and development. One really interesting thing is when you look at an earlier map of Kensington, it's from 1924, the red being commercial, the yellow being residential, you see actually a much greater mixing of residential and commercial in a residential neighborhood than in the present. But that's one of the unique hallmarks of Kensington, is the mixture of commercial and residential in one space. And then one group looked at cultural spaces and events over time. And then the last one looked at historical and existing and potential gentrification pressures, dividing this into resiliency and threats around gentrification, and thinking about the increasing amounts of social housing over time, but also the increasing price over time, and what factors of the market might be encouraging gentrification and what might be resisting it. So the second project was, we looked at 3 different densities of development. So each student picked one of 11 different sites, one of 12 different sites actually, but there were 15 students, so some of them are group projects. And they each proposed an as-of-right development on the site, a developer maximum development, and a proposed optimal development for the Kensington Community Land Trust, Kensington Market Community Land Trust. And these were then presented to the Land Trust to see what would be the best. So here's an example of a smaller, it's a strangely shaped lot. It's kind of got 2 squares that meet at a corner. But this is the minimum as of right. This is, I think, developer maximum. And this is the optimal, according to the student. And here's a much larger site. This is a school site. And this group, each group did the drawings on the right, plus these axonometrics. So I'm just showing a fragment of the drawings that they did for each of these proposals. But they did these 9 proposals, the 3 students working together. And they looked at, first of all, if they kept the school, what would be the as of right, the ideal, and the developer maximum. And then they looked what would happen if they modified the school in the middle. And then they looked at what would happen if they rebuilt the school and developed the whole site. And so from these the conversations with the Land Trust that came out of the presentation of this work, students developed one of these schemes further in the last part of the term. And so here's the presentation for the last part of the term. Kensington as a laboratory for ways of life. Infill as a means of leaving space for residents to make their own spaces. And this is an image that Eugene Slonemarov of the Land Trust showed to show what was possible. He's very familiar with Georgia and developments there. This is Nabiha Rahman's project on Spadina. And this is actually an existing KMCLT building. So thinking about adding 4 stories to it. This is actually an Air Studio precedent. So we're going to see maybe more of this from Inga later. But with the central courtyard and the stairs on the central courtyard. And Nabiha really was thinking about immigration and her family's own experiences on Spadina, and the ways that this courtyard could be a social space where the smells of kitchens that are adjacent to the courtyard could help to create community. This is Kaylin Schellenberg's project, and here, this is Glen Bailey Place, which is a very interesting infill fragment in the market off Spadina down a lane. But you can see it's a very mid-block project, but the massing moves from the single-family houses on Glen Bailey Place up to this 8-story building, which is on Spadina. And it does that in a series of steps. And it knits into the existing laneway structure, both from the southern parking lot is actually a KMCLT property, 302 Spadina. So you can connect up through that. You can get to Glen Bailey Place where these houses are, but also up north to St. Andrews and west to Kensington through different lanes. So the building has pass-throughs and openings to kind of encourage this network. And they were also thinking a lot about how the double height units in this building, which you can see here, similar to ones that Ben was talking about earlier, these can be, they have double height spaces that can be infilled. They have large balconies, which can also be infilled. And the smaller units can be combined to make larger units over time. And Leah and Lamia looked at the Kensington parking lot and thought about how 4 or 5 stories of housing could be added on the roof of the housing, and that the roof itself could be a kind of public park. So the courtyard between these two buildings could be a publicly accessible place with cafe, pickleball court, community gardens, and an outdoor screening area. And Greta Duggan looked at a college to Oxford infill site with a number of buildings, but tried to think about how youth, homeless youth, and artists' live workspaces could be combined to create a kind of complementary programming, thinking about really interesting ways that both pedestrian and vehicle circulation could move through the block, and different services from retail at college to a gallery at Oxford, and in between a set of workshops could create and animate the courtyards at grade. And she was also thinking a lot about how the units could be variable through a kind of enfilade plan. So this work was presented in Kensington last Saturday, and we made an exhibition where development signs for all the students' projects were installed throughout Kensington. So on all these sites, you can see the development posters. And this is actually the principal of the Kensington Community School, who has a degree in urbanism and is highly supportive of this project. We also had the area planner come and was also very excited about these ideas about infill. So if you're interested, this Saturday from 2 to 5, we're going to have another event in the market with the Kensington Market Community Land Trust. We're going to have a tour from 2 to 3 outside of 302 Spadina. And we're very thankful to our partners at the Kensington Market Community Land Trust, and also to Karen Kuby and Daniel Ling from Montgomery Sizem, and David. Thanks. So I don't know, Amina, are you here? Or sorry, I know Amina's not here. Is there somebody from
Sorry, I'm her student. I'll be filling in for her today.
Amazing. Do you want to share screen, or have you uploaded?
Yes, I can present my screen. I think she did. Oh, she did fill it in right there.
Great. Okay. So I'll just go full screen. No, I don't.
You can go to the next slide. It's front page. There we go. So hello, honey, everyone. My name is Kirsten Tate, and I'm originally from Bawating, Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, with Anishinaabe heritage. I'm here today presenting for the Laurentian University MacEwan School of Architecture, Storied Lands, which is an M1 studio coordinated by Amina Lalor. This class has significantly been important to me due to colonial activity. My family has suffered much loss of practice Anishinaabe knowledge. And through this class, I both learned about myself and culture while also being able to catch how I can best move forward in terms of engaging and building on Indigenous lands. Next slide. Next slide.
Do you see the next slide? I mean,
Oh, no, I don't.
No, you don't?
Oh, there we
Okay.
go.
Does anyone else?
There we go.
Yeah.
My
Which one do you want? Do you want?
might be. The one before that. Thank you. Sorry, my connection might be a little bad. So this studio was centered on gathering and sharing stories connected to land and place through land-based and community-engaged research, spatial storytelling and placekeeping design exercises, contributing to long-term creation of colonial atlas or storied land bundles of Nswagmok Sudbury, while engaging with these themes to propose placekeeping architectural designs that center around its stories, needs, and Anishinaabe representation. Rather than being focused specifically on housing alienation, our studio has been more focused on alienation from land, learning from land, and how to best enhance culture and environmental representation through these designs. Next slide. Throughout this semester, we also started by observing a site of our choice at a minimum of once a week and documented our observations through drawings and visual descriptions while incorporating studies directed at gaining a better understanding of our chosen topics within these areas. Through these studies and observations, we each then developed a mapping study of our own, informed by our topic and differing ways to represent these activities. We started the term by digging into research about Nsquamish Sudbury, and within our small studio of 7 students, we each selected an area of focus. Next slide. Some themes that were chosen by the students were looking at the significance of medicines and plants within Indigenous communities. So here's a project that's kind of focused on the regreening of Sudbury and how we can bring in plant knowledge from the reserves that are outside the communities and bring that inside. Next slide. Next project looks at animal habitats and migration. So these are 2 different projects and just mapping out on the site where these habitats are and how humans have engaged with it and how we can better design for the site. Next slide. So this one is a project by a student about how to address sensitive riparian zones. So looking at vegetation that is close to the water and the site aspects that kind of engage with the water and how we can improve this. Next slide. The next project looks at events that occurred at a larger geological timescale and the Indigenous inhabitation over the millennial. Next slide. We also did have a project that engaged with houselessness in Sudbury and specifically focused on Indigenous representation within the community. Next slide. And then we also had a project which looked at the process of the region's regreening. So we did our best to look at these topics through a decolonial lens grounded in understanding Swagmok Sudbury as an Indigenous place. Next slide. So as part of the studio, we also had a chance to visit one Swagmok rename by Dr. Alex Wilson. Next slide. So we were able to participate in land activities, and we also learned about a mapping project that OCN has been working on for many years, and visited one of the homes built as part of the One House Many Nations project. So next slide. So with working with Dr. Alex Wilson and looking at this project that they're doing in OCN, we did mapping out our own project on the site that Alex parents are working on. So observing the other than human relations on the site in a Pasquat Cree Nation and that will eventually be a land-based education center. Next slide. So learning from our experience in Manitoba and building on our research, we started to select a program that could be proposed on or near our site that we got to know over the term, and proposed programs that kind of addressed these topics and the site itself. So this project was one that proposed a program that included an Indigenous Health and Plant and Medicine Center. Next slide. This is the one that looked at the kind of transition over the years of that geological time scale, and kind of how to address engaging with the environment and looking at these different aspects at a taller scale. Next project. This is the one that kind of looked at the animal habitats and kind of proposed a learning center that focused on animal learning and land-based learning. Next slide. This is another project. This is the one that was looking at the regreening in Sudbury. So this one was the ecological center, and it was focused right on Laurentian University. So it included land-based learning and looking how we can engage with regreening within Sudbury. Next slide. This is another project. This was a ecological center as well. So it was bringing in different activities and how to engage people more with the site and with the river's edge, bringing kind of outdoor activity into this learning. Next slide. This is the one before that. There we go. This is the one that was addressing Indigenous housing within Sudbury, how to bring in health and wellness and kind of low-cost housing into the Sudbury area, and representing kind of the different prices that is happening in Sudbury. Next slide. And finally, this is a project that was looking at the migration of animals, how to observe them without disrupting them and learning about them. So during and at the end of these interventions, we invited elders and knowledge carriers and local land-based educators to visit with us, providing feedback and on our placekeeping proposals to help guide our projects. This happened at the middle of our projects, and then we also brought them in at the end of our projects to kind of see where our projects have gone since the start. Next slide. So finally, the themes that we kind of engaged with throughout the semester were the importance of understanding our interconnection with other than human relations and how we can introduce programming in our city that would foster relationship building with the land. Introducing programs specifically meant to serve Indigenous groups, offering what we can in terms of land back. Considering our responsibility to the Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1850 and how Indigenous voices have been underrepresented in the process, like regreening. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kirsten. That's great. Maurizio?
All right, am I up?
You're up.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, and I'm super happy to be here. This has been quite the experience. So I also, had a couple more slides than requested, but I'll promise to be brief. So, okay, so next slide. So, my studio was an undergrad studio, so it was only a second year studio. So it's the Bachelor of in Design in City Innovation. So it's a transdisciplinary studio. So students still haven't decided what they're going to do, but it is a studio-based degree. that supports critical thinking, hands-on making, and so on. So I think it's similar to, to what you guys have at Waterloo and Toronto. I think it's called the Bachelor of, I can't remember, Bachelor of Architectural Studies, or Bachelor of Environmental Design at Manitoba, or the Bachelor of Design at UBC. So next slide. So this is the question of the studio. So we asked students, okay, how can Canadian housing evolve with people, adapt to climate, and foster a more collaborative life? So next slide. And in my case, in the case of the porous dwelling, I asked students to think about how housing could be more adaptive, resilient, how could evolve with time, and can support, again, collective experiences. So next slide. And it was based in the town of Canmore in Alberta, which is a living lab for climate responsive and community oriented housing. It's in the middle of the mountains, but it shows an acute tension between ecological protection, housing demand. There is a huge shortage of housing. Rents in the last couple of years has skyrocketed, historic lows of vacancy. A little house here costs over $1 million, which is, of course, way beyond the median income of people living here. It's a very young population, which resonated with the students. A lot of seasonal workers, young families, and which people have been priced out. And there is at the same time about 25% of all the houses are empty because they're owned by non-residents who use it only as vacation homes. So basically, we went there. We took students to this town, and we asked them to just walk around, take inspiration from Guy Debord's concept of derive and drift through the area, not guiding by any predetermined route or anything, but by subtle pulse of the terrain, the sounds, the encounters with people, and the atmospheres. So they selected their own sites based on that. Next slide. So the studio had essentially 3 operations. So the first one was research. These are very young students. I had a student in the semester that was underage. He was turning 18 during the studio. But very talented group. By the way, the good news, I guess, for the future of designers, our new bachelor's program is, as I mentioned, it's new, but it has become the most selective undergraduate program at the University of Calgary. So a lot of young people show interest in the design of this, in the future of design. So, okay, so Operation 1 again was research. Students had to come up with, you have to look. I gave them a list of precedents, and they had to also study a manifesto. Then in Operation 2, they had to kind of rethink what housing could even be, and come up almost like with their own DNA, the DNA of the project, a small manifesto. And then in Operation 3, they had to talk about our homes, so a communal dwelling for 6 to 10 people with shared resources. Now, I should preface to say that because the project, it was tailored towards a younger group of students, it was meant to be very experimental and creative, and to kind of tickle the imagination about what our relationship with the world, with nature, with each other should be in the framework of housing. So the first project, Next House, next slide. Oh, that one. So this was a group of students that essentially walked around town, and they came up with this idea of, instead of having a single building, they wanted to, in essence, sprinkle little housing units for young couples that could be placed lightly on the land without disturbing that could be placed between trees, not even on any specific lot, and then with very minimal resources, and then have a more communal building where they could all have an actual kitchen, a communal space, and so on, which force the inhabitants to actually always be in contact with nature. So you're in the middle of the night and you want to go and have a bite, you have to get out of your unit and meander through this forest area and go to the common area, the common building, and have some food. So it was this idea, next slide, of incorporating nature as an architectural incorporating nature in their own architectural discourse. Next slide. So different, views of the same project. They were also, very tickled by this idea of creating a little bit of mystery and suspense where you didn't know exactly that this thing was there and so on. And it was almost like a secret society of youngsters living in the woods. Next slide. So these projects were developed by the same group. The students themselves, they're really into climbing and hiking. So they essentially assigned 3 community homes, one at the base of the mountain, one in the middle of the mountain, and one at the top of the mountain. So this is an existing trail. And so the one at the bottom essentially shows almost like, next slide, shows, a courtyard house with a lot of a community kitchen and community, resources and individual bedrooms. And it was meant, for people who could live here all year round, but also has the base camp for people who were so inclined to, to climb up the mountain. So the second house, next slide, is on the left, and they call it a sloping house, and it was designed, again, to be a cafe where the workers can actually also live here permanently, and the amenities and the house, the experience was based on, of course, on the different activity. The quality of the space was based on the expression of many of the materials that they use, the views, the location, but also the relationship between the users. On the top of the mountain, then it was a house that was meant to be a permanent home for avid climbers or guides, that they will take people all the way to the top. And then even, to move between floors, they had to use a climbing wall and so on. So very creative and probably very expensive and unrealistic, but I was very happy, with their view of what housing could be. So the next one, Canmore was back in the day a mining town, and there's always some areas that cannot be fully developed because they're unstable due to all the mining activities on the ground. So this group of students said, well, what if we just make, the spaces on the ground a communal housing? And then on top, what we can have is almost like a sculpture garden that lets light in, that invites the community, and so on. So that's what they did. It's essentially a community home underground. Next slide. And of course, there are not necessarily any bedrooms or things like that. It was open and so on. So next slide.
Oh, Mauricio, you're at about 8 minutes.
Yes. So, okay. So let's just, let's go to the next. So similar idea, this time for climbing, in the winter, there's a whole community of young people who like to climb. So the building is their own club, is where they live and is climbable. So next slide. So of course they did a lot of experimental models and materials, studies. Next slide. And these are some of the drawings. Next slide. And finally, there was one about bicycles and climbing. So this was almost like a product design series of units that could be also sprinkled along all the network of bicycle in Canmore. And they had essentially two configurations. On the left, the individual units along the paths, and on the right, almost like a vertical display where the units were deployed on some of these infrastructural piles with a community and a larger space with all the resources below. Next slide. This is just showing some of the sections. And I think that's the last project. So next slide. And that's it. So just to mention that next semester, we will deploy this idea of a project again, but this time it will be for master students in their last year. So there will be a more rigorous, approach in terms of community and multifamily co-housing and the study will also be centered around prefabrication and mass timber. So I look forward to what the students will do next year. Thank you.
Thanks, Maurizio. So I think this is our last presentation from Inga from UBC.
Hi, everyone. So our studio is a second-year master students studio, and it's actually an urban design studio. And our focus was on co-designing and the role of the architect in working with communities. So we were really lucky that for me, it's already the second studio to work with a really exciting community from the 17th. And that is Falls Creek South in Vancouver. It's about 6,000 units. And back in the days, this was a bottom-up approach. There's a lot of co-ops, rentals, some condos, but a mix. And what's happening now is that the lease land from the city, back in the days, this was not desirable land when it was given to these groups, community groups, to develop it. But now the leases are come to an end, and the community built a group called Replan to a community to discuss the process, how to preserve the community and to add more housing to counter the city's proposal to densify potentially with towers, what we see on the other side. So our studio collaborated with Replan, the group, and we were really fortunate that Replan was taking the time, coming in on a regular basis and co-design with the students. So our focus was really how are we as architects co-designing with the community, listening to their desires and translate that into a design framework. So I also took a bit of an different approach. I have 3 teams of students here who quickly talk about their reflection of the studio. So I give over. I think we're starting. Who is starting out?
It's me, Olga.
Okay, perfect. Ethan,
Yeah.
I give over to you. You guys are better prepared than me, probably. Go.
So hi, my name's Ethan. So I'm representing one of the main groups, like Inga said, that focused on kind of working around the studio. So to briefly summarize, because I know Inga kind of went kind of top heavy, I guess I'll start by saying kind of what surprised us most was how little housing has changed despite shifts in how people live. So housing in Vancouver continues to rely on a narrow set of spatial configurations, while residents have limited agency, as most projects are delivered through rigid models with little room for participation or adaptation. In a context of affordability pressures, housing shortages, more single-person households, and an aging population, this disconnect led us to reevaluate existing housing models through precedent research research that you can see the four kind of main precedents that we looked at here. Next slide, I think. Yeah. So False Creek South is a waterfront neighborhood in Vancouver built in the 1970s on public land. It's planned as mixed income, pedestrian-oriented community with a strong presence of cooperative and non-market housing. Studying the neighborhood revealed a different logic from most contemporary development. So courtyards, shared paths, and collective open space are integral to daily life and shape how residents live, move, and care for them over time. And as we discussed, the land leases are beginning to expire. So now is like a really important time for developing the site and making sure that the qualities of the site stay. Next slide. So in our specific group, we kind of two people focused on main design guidelines. So our project as a whole was called Interwoven Urbanism, and it translates the values of the False Creek South community and replan into a spatial framework for future growth. So rather than starting with individual buildings, we focused on neighborhood structure. We treated the neighborhood as an ecosystem where housing, movement, landscape, and shared space are interconnected. The design guidelines translate this thinking into spatial rules that support resident involvement, diverse ways of living, and adaptability over time. Next slide, please. Thank you. A central idea of the project is life between buildings. So we focused on the everyday spaces where people move, meet, and negotiate shared life, including paths, courtyards, and common ground. By treating these spaces as the primary structure of the neighborhood, the project shifts attention from isolated buildings to relationships, creating conditions for collective life to evolve. Next slide. So in particular, we did 2 prototypes of these design guidelines. So for the first prototype, which is called Rooted Commons, it tests the guidelines at a scale of several mid-rise buildings. So here, housing operates as a collective system. Shared ground, circulation, and outdoor space are treated as part of the housing itself, not as leftover amenities. This prototype explores how everyday life can extend beyond the private unit while still giving residents influence over how space is used and shared. Next slide, please. Thanks. And for the second prototype, which was placed right beside the first prototype, it's called Lifted Ground, and it applies the same principles within a single building, exploring how shared space can organize vertical living. Collective programs anchor the lower levels and extend upward through a vertical garden, creating gradual transitions from shared activity to private homes. So together, the design guidelines and prototypes show how neighborhood scale principles can guide future growth while staying rooted in the social and spatial qualities of False Creek South. And with that, I'll hand it over to the next group, and they can share their reflections on how they approach these questions.
Everyone, my name is Yani. It is a pleasure to talk on behalf of the group. Today, I would like to share how we translated lesson from precedent and co-design session with client group into a grounded framework for a community-based house on site. At a high level, we use the precedent to understand how different sharing models shape space and social life. We looked across co-op housing, co-housing, and bulk group across the world and asked, what kind of everyday space help people live collectively without forcing it? With few strategy kept repeating. First, the best social space weren't only big common rooms. They were a network of small distributed social zones, widened corridors, shared threshold, semi-public edges, and visual route that support light, casual interaction. Second, having point access stairs or a single corridor not only improves the building's efficiency, but also creates shared space. It simplifies circulation, but also increases casual encounter. What we took from this is that community is often built through routine proximity, and the building can support it through clear organization, shared transitions, and space that invite pause. Next slide, please. On the site, the work became less about imposing a single visions and more about building alignments. We had ongoing discussions with client groups, and the project evolved through co-design, testing what kind of ground space feel welcoming, safe, and usable in daily life. That's how Common Thread emerged, a simple idea that ground can work like a shared neighborhood spine, connecting movement, landscape, and small moments of gathering. It sets up a framework that can adapt over time but still support a shared sense of place. Next slide, please. From there, we applied the precedent logic and what we learned from the site and client group directly. These are a little moments of our group members' work. We mainly work with medium scale building, typically 6 to 8 story high, and collaborate by sharing a common entry street and providing ground level connectivity along the edge and circulation path. The proposals shift both the ground and the building toward a shared structure, where threshold both horizontally and vertically do the community work. Instead of like separating people quickly into private zone, the design holds a sequence of shared transitions that make everyday interaction possible. Next. Overall, the reflection is that the president taught us the spatial tools and co-design process taught us what matters to carry forward. The project is not just about providing shared amenities, but about creating a clear, repeatable framework, ground spine and vertical spine that we all can share, and where growth and change can happen without losing community. And I'll hand it to Julie.
Hi, thanks, Yanni. So our group focused on this one. Yeah, so our group focused on the east side of Fosbury South neighborhood. We worked both on the design guidelines and the individual building designs. So we started with formulating an ecosystem for our proposal, looking at connections and synergies within the site and the larger urban realm. The top left are the precedent studies, and the bottom left are the existing conditions that we learned from our research and from the clients, such as what works well already and what challenges we might face. Then the larger circle on the right summarizes the information across different scales, from units to buildings to the neighborhood. And next slide, please. After mapping out the ecosystem, we developed the design guidelines to set up a shared framework for our individual proposals. It focuses on 4 themes: open space, roofscape, building envelope, form, and ancillary facilities. The major building typologies are single lily corridors and point stairs to maximize sunlight and natural ventilation, prioritizing quality of living as we increase density. Next one. And next, we worked on the overall massing design based on the 6 key drivers on the left: design language, topography, orientation, courtyards, view framing, and layered green space. The proposed massing shown on the site plan uses landscape as a continuous language, stitching the waterfront community back into the broader urban fabric on the south. The open spaces between buildings serve as outdoor living rooms with numerous programming opportunities, maintaining the courtyard characteristic of the neighborhood. Next one. And lastly, each of us picked a building parcel and worked on the individual designs to tackle affordability, livability, and sustainability. Each building follows the same ecosystem vision and design guidelines, then test them with different site conditions and programs. During this process, we're still working collaboratively to decide on building heights, shared programming types, and locations. This allowed us to produce a cohesive neighborhood plan with strong spatial and social connections that supports a resilient future community. And that's all from EBC. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. It's great. So I think we're at the end of our presentations. We are. And I think what we'd like to do is we'd like to have a little conversation. I don't know, Sarah, what do you think? How many people are here? Should we divide into smaller groups or should we stay in a big group or divide into...
I kind of wonder if we should just stay as a big group. We're 34 people. Yeah, does that seem all right?
Yeah.
I think so. Let's stay as
Yeah.
one big group.
So we have we have two questions we wanted to talk about now. The first one, maybe I'll read both of them and then we can start with the first one. So the first one is, what are the key architectural opportunities and obstacles to end housing alienation in Canada? I mean, that's framed very, very broadly, but I guess let's try to talk about it in relation to the work that you've just seen. And maybe, I know there are a number of you here who are going to be teaching in the winter term. So, or in relation to the things you're thinking about for the winter term. And then the second question is, what new ideas and practices should be incorporated into the Winter Superstudio? And not necessarily just into the Winter Superstudio, but I think we're wondering how we're not necessarily going to do this for another year, but what is the Superstudio beyond the Superstudio? Maybe is part of that question. But why don't we start with the first one? What are the key architectural opportunities and obstacles to end housing alienation in Canada that you see emerging from the research and design that you've been doing in these studios?
I dropped in the chat, first off, I dropped the two questions into the chat, but also a link to a Miro board. And on the Miro board, it's got the two questions. You could also just throw a Post-it note on if you feel more comfortable doing that with your thoughts or responses to that. And then also on the left, you could see kind of PDFs of each segment of the presentations we just saw from each of the studios, and you can flip through the slides if you want to refresh them.
I don't know if I should just offer some brief thoughts. In my case, of course, students were extremely creative, very much on board. They don't know really half of the challenges that are coming their way, but they're definitely very optimistic about their position in the world to tackle those challenges. And I find that very inspiring. But on the other hand, I also noticed that in preparation for the next semester, I realized that that multidisciplinary approach to tackle housing is critical. That with all the enthusiasm and the design skills and everything that we architects and designers bring to the table, that of course this is a very complex issue, and design alone might not be able to tackle this. So that's why I was very happy to see that as a group we're thinking about financing, we're collaborating with not-for-profit organizations, we're communicating with representatives and city officials, and we're looking at it from many different points of view, that we're collaborating and trying to learn from indigenous elders and communities. So there is not a single solution and to this challenge, and it will and many of them will really need to be developed, taking into consideration not just what we can offer as designers, but also our limitations, what we're limited to do as designers, and how we need to depend on the larger community of professionals and community members.
Maybe I don't know whether Ben or David. Do we have I can't see it. Does Zoom have an order?
Ben was first.
Ben, okay.
Yeah, I think one of the things that distinguishes North America from a lot of other contexts is the lack of public land. A lot of European cities, for instance, had the opportunity to land bank at various points, and therefore have the opportunity to build without having to take into account the cost of land. I think one of the opportunities in Ottawa is the total amount of public land we have. We've got a lot of federal land that's up on the block, and that's super exciting. I think within Ottawa we have more than enough space and capacity to actually do something. It's just the will is Canada Lands, for instance, interested in or eager to actually make that land available, and at what cost. In terms of the challenges, it's funny, when I talk to we've seen the the condo market kind of crashing in Toronto, and more people talking about not wanting condos. I have a friend who works at Minto and says they've got lots of stuff for sale, but nobody wants anything except freehold, and people just want freehold, and so that's a huge challenge to get out from under the idea that we need to own, and that owning is a way of accumulating wealth, which is always been super important to the middle class. So I just throw those two things out there as opportunities and obstacles.
David?
Watching this and thinking about next semester as well. I thought I'd just share, I mean, to follow up what Mauricio was saying, I think that the greatest opportunities and successes that I'm thinking about are the collaborations with the communities themselves, and not solely for just the purpose of sort of breaking down the ivory tower reputations of our schools, and opening up this collaborative spirit, which is really important for housing, as Mauricio was saying. But I often think when I'm sitting there, and Adrian, your studio is the only one that I've seen obviously reviews on, but you have community leaders engaging in very architectural conversations, which I think the more I reflect on that, I think what an amazing opportunity for I think it's not out of ignorance, just that people don't know the value of architectural design. So I think there's like a two-way thing, right? Like the students and the universities are learning from the communities about issues of importance to the communities, and the communities hold the deep knowledge of these places, which is also really great. But there is also this thing that strikes me as important, which is just having conversations about architectural typologies and innovations within how the buildings are designed, which then backfeeds to, I think, raising the bar in terms of the quality of the solutions. So, and that potentially extends beyond the universities. After these studios are done, that there just starts to be more conversation about the role of architecture specifically. So I think that's like a pretty profound opportunity to me in the work that has been shared today. And then I also I think I've also been reflecting on the challenges, and not so much for the universities so much, but which I've expressed frustration on many different levels. But just the idea of the catalog housing, and in Toronto, for instance, there's an RFP out right now for basically pre-stamped sixplex and fourplex units. So they're just going to speed those through, and I think like a sixplex on one lot is a very different architectural scenario than a sixplex on a different lot, for instance. Maybe fourplexes are more straightforward, but so I do think like there's this idea of panic supply houses, which it's been going on for a long time, but that's also something that we're up against, is just the pre-designed solution to the problems that people are saying. But yeah, I just wanted to thank everybody for all of their work, and their student work is really great. So.
Matthew?
Yeah, I second that. Thanks so much for sharing all the wonderful work. I'm curious, and one thing that struck me about the work is just the diversity of scales at which the different studios and students were working at. And I think that was a real richness in the range of work shown today. And I'm just curious what everyone here feels about. I think maybe this dovetails a little bit with what you were just speaking about, David. But the question of sort of how to have non-alienated or less alienated housing in relation to questions of sort of the mass scale of the problem, and delivering housing at a kind of certain scale. And yeah, I'm just curious what people's thoughts are around that problematic.
I might say something. I was looking for my hand on the board. First of all, I think it was really impressive to see the work from all the different studios, and I agree the range is huge. I mean, people were in different levels from graduate to first year students in some cases. So that was really interesting, but also the locales seem to feed into the kind of work. So some people are working in very dense urban situations like Toronto, and other people are working in much more natural and remote situations more typical of the rest of Canada. So it was nice to see the work was responding to those conditions. Um, in many ways, I think what's nice about having that, and thanks to you guys for having created this opportunity, is for us to just really see the the scope of this problem and the various ways that students at different levels can engage with it. I mean, one thing I thought going forward after having watched these is that it might be good to involve planners in the future, or a planning studio, just to really dig in a deep way, because that seems to be such a fundamental problem with the design of housing in Canada, that we've defined these lots that were originally in single family home lots, and we're burdened with those going forward. And so just thinking outside of the box of how to do that. One thing that I would encourage people to look at is Impossible Toronto, which is available for free online now. That was just recently published. And that's kind of looking at planning issues, looking at the block structure in a place like Toronto, and overlaying a European model on top of that to try and create courtyard housing, and looking at more moderate scale. I think scale is one of the things that we're going to be looking at next semester in my studio. And I'm doing undergrad students, they're just second year students, but we're going to try and tackle density and scale and look comparatively at their case studies and where they live now, and they can experience space in real time in Toronto of all different scales, these, hyper dense projects, and the very low density residential that's everywhere. So anyway, that's a bit of a ramble, but just some thoughts about going forward, maybe next year if you want to do it again. Engaging planners.
I think we're going to be engaging planners next term, David, in our studio. We'll see how that works out. Veronica, you're next, and then Inga.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone for their presentations. What I was really kind of noticed and was really kind of great to see was the sensitivity of each of the projects towards housing and the different kind of explorations in that. We did not present today because our students are still completing their projects. They have until the end of the term, but we've been focusing on the rural and regional landscape in Canada. And one of the things that we've been kind of understanding out of that exploration is that there are some very extreme diversities in terms of geographic and climatic conditions across Canada that need to be addressed. And in some ways, David, back to your point about cataloging and creating like a one-fit-all solution is, I think, can be very problematic if it's not coupled with engagement as well as understanding of specific in place. And so we've been looking at things of how can architecture present itself as an innovative solution to manage things like shifting permafrost soils that are causing foundation, issues, isolated communities that are completely isolated during different times of the year. And even just costs of construction due to logistics and material supply across Canada. So I think there are some opportunities in the methods in which we design that can really present some innovative ways to provide housing to more in areas that are in great need. And I think that those are some of the things we're going to continue to look at in next term, because our students, we do have another cohort of housing students coming next term, and we'll compile all of the final projects and share them at once. But I also think thinking back too about opportunities for shifting kind of the ownership of land, like we heard with Barry John's lecture, and thinking differently about home ownership and how we can maybe create innovative solutions that I think can be, applicable to both rural and urban conditions. So, what are some of the commonalities in that as well? So, I think there's a lot to talk about how architecture could really influence housing and accessibility and attainability of housing for more.
Thanks, Veronica. Inga?
Yeah. Well, thank you, everyone. I really appreciate all the work the students and the studios did. And I think what struck me is how diverse it is, which is not a reflection on what I see in housing delivery in Canada. So I thought this was really amazing to see how many, how different and from scales to exploring. And I think there's the big disconnect we have here, that we have such a monoculture in housing delivery. So we focused a lot on, and we were so fortunate to work with actually a community who already in the 70s went about that people should be more engaged in making their own environment, and kind of do a new iteration and look what would that mean now. And I think it was very interesting, the two architects and planners. So we had planners coming in because it was an urban design studio. They came in on a regular base, and one of them was actually the designer of all the towers just across the water. And we had very interesting discussions, and it was very interesting. He was very strong at the first half of it, and all of a sudden there was a bit of, oh, well, maybe we can do this differently, and maybe we don't. So I asked my students, I don't want to see any density calculations first. We look at qualities, and then we can figure out, right? Because the whole, the way the urban designers with the towers started out, this is the densities we need. And I think what I saw in studio here was all a focus on qualities and not on starting out with the numbers we need. And I think that's what I really appreciated here. And what I hope our students took on is that we also have to question the role of the architect in terms of getting people more involved, getting more engaged in their housing delivery, which I think what I saw in Europe is way stronger than here. And here everyone, and I think David pointed out that, oh, now they get the catalogs for the sites, which is actually, I thought, wow, what a great opportunity for especially our young architects getting out, having these mid-sized projects. And now they're trying again to do a framework to get the architects out of this. That, because that is kind of, I went to a lecture, they're saying if we have these prefab designs, you can do this without an architect. And I think us as educators, we should really stand for that. We're gonna be out there and be more part of creating the everyday environment, and don't leave this to kind of like check boxes. I don't think that makes the housing delivery faster in any way. Anyway, I'm rambling on here too, but I kind of liked what I heard, and I'm really worried about that these mid-sized buildings, they kind of want to do it so that can be done without an architect. And I think this is something which struck me. I went to a lecture, I think it was George Brown a few years ago. He said 96% of all buildings in Canada are done without an architect. That kind of like shocked me so much, but it's true. Think about it, that, we doing a lot of, well, past tense, we only had very small, and then the towers, but all our fabric in between, well, we didn't really have the mid-size. And so I think we should really be out there and showing that we can be have a stronger part in creating our housing neighborhoods, our communities. I stop there and
Thanks, Inga.
rambling on.
I wonder, we've got some students here, probably about half students here. It'd be great to hear from the younger generation.
I was also wondering if the students might jump into question two, which is about what should be incorporated into the next studio. So for the students here who were in the studios in the fall, what did you find really great about your studio that you hope that that will continue for the studios that run in the spring?
We have some TAs too for next year's studios here who could feel free to jump in as well.
No students. Mauricio, should we share?
I noticed that Audrey put her camera on. Sorry, Audrey, to put you on the spot.
No, I have a lot of thoughts. So I'm happy to share. I think one thought that I had, like I like hearing people talk about the fact that we need to have a multidisciplinary approach. One thing I experienced in our urban design studio was we had a transportation engineer come in, and there were some people in the second year that like felt that learning about transportation didn't pertain to their architecture. And so I think that these things that we think are disjointed have a lot of value, and incorporating them in a way where architectural students understand how it is deeply related and can really like be used to feed or support your architecture, especially when you're working with the public realm, is great. And then another thing, like we had the fortune in Inga's studio to work with, I believe her PhD student right now, who is a mix of a like developer and financial knowledge holder, I'll say, what Inga likes to call the spreadsheet people. So she kind of guided us through pro forma. But I think it was a bit overwhelming and disappointing because I think that kind of highlights the obstacles in housing alienation, like how land is valued, how building is valued. I found it very like saddening because I was like, oh, cool. At the end of the day, it's the same thing as always. The dollar value is what matters, and there's inertia in the system. But what we had the blessing of doing was like, this person showed us how we can perhaps manipulate a pro forma to push a project that you really like and is valuable and find a way to make it valuable to people looking at the spreadsheet. So I wonder what ways that could be incorporated, especially in like bite-sized pieces, because we had one session and it was a lot to take in. But yeah, thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Audrey.
thanks, Audrey. This was my first time ever bringing a spreadsheet into studio, so there's lots of room for improvement. But I just felt like I wanted to show the students how that really works, and we did a very reduced one. But I felt just having seen it once and understanding it
I
is
think
a
it's
learning.
powerful.
Mhm.
I think it's powerful, and I think it shows the reality of construction. And from my experience, like I have an engineering background, but I also am now doing architecture. And it's like at no point in my education until now have I experienced the pro forma and then seen how it can be utilized as a tool to promote good housing and good architecture. So I think that there's like it is a tool that we can start to use for our benefit. In one session, it wasn't enough for me to figure it out, but I see a lot with that. Binga, thank you.
I think we're almost at time to move to a little bit of discussion about uploading documents, but maybe if there is another student who'd like to jump in, we'd love to hear from them. I don't know if I'm thinking about Nisha and Daniel, partly because you've got future and past relationships with this project.
Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, hi. I'm Daniel. I'm going to be TAing Adrian's studio in this coming January. But I've actually had the privilege to work with his past studio through critiques and kind of a support in a semi kind of TA-ship role. Um, but yeah, I wanted to comment maybe on a few of the studios today did actually reach out to the communities and work with community groups in the process of running a studio. And I just wanted to say that when we speak about context in architecture, I think the one of the biggest things that is overlooked at the academic level as well is uh, having the community itself be within the context. I think we talk a lot about physical structures, but surrounding a project with the right kind of people who believe in the vision of the project actually changes the dynamics of that situation. And I think I saw that play out very well in Adrian's studio, taking, fifth or I think 20 students through consistent conversations with community members to their sensitivities, architecturally, et cetera. Having that background, I think, is it made the projects come out a lot more positive and a lot more sensitive to the context that they're in. So yeah, I just wanted to highlight that, having seen the kind of architectural and developer sides of the industry. Um, the who you work with is a great thing. So I wanted to highlight that and say it was positive.
Thanks, Daniel. I wonder if in the interest of time, Matthew, do you want to jump in with, should I share the rest of the presentation?
Maybe I'll just, yeah, I can jump in, and this won't take very long at all. We can be very quick about it. I'll share my screen in a moment, Adrian. I think that might be
Okay.
easier. So, yeah, thanks again, everybody, for sharing all the wonderful work. And we are very excited to share it with a broader community via a digital exhibition online. So we have created, I think you're all aware of it, but a Google form where students can upload their final projects. I pasted in the chat the link to that Google form. We know it's a really busy time of year, but we're hoping that students can upload their final projects by Friday. That would be really helpful for us to give us the time to organize it into the online exhibition that we're hoping to launch towards the end of January. So we and our web designer Ali Kadir, a key component of AHA, will be working on it over the holidays. So I'm going to just very quickly, because I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but I'm going to just show you the the Google form. So and we're asking students to upload between 5 and 10 images of their work, and we're asking for students who worked in teams for just one student to upload the material on behalf of the team. So it's per project. So when you follow that link, you will be met with this page that will ask you to sign in, a very quick, simple sign in process. I've already done that. You hit next, And essentially here, I've just put some basic filler text in advance, but we ask for a project title, a poster image. That's sort of one key image that will be shown on a kind of teaser page where a grid essentially of all the projects. We are asking students to upload some basic alt text for accessibility issues. If you don't know what alt text is, you can click on this link and it will tell you what it is. Basically, the names of all the students that worked on a project, what the home studio is. There's a drop down here, so you can select BCIT or Laurentian or whatever fits you. And then obviously AHA's work and the work of the studio, Superstudio has demands at or play a very important role. So we ask you to select one or more from this demand list that connects to the work, the studio work. And then we have a list of tags that is going to just help us allow users of the digital exhibition to filter their search results and see your projects um, through certain lenses. So please click at least one that relate to your work. And then a 50 to 250 word description, very simple. And then you click next, and that's essentially where you upload between 5 and 10 images. Very, very simple. It gives you some description, what the format and size, all simple stuff. And then at the bottom here, you have the option, no pressure, but if it's something you're excited to do or already have, upload a URL and give a caption, and then you hit submit, and that's it. Simple, simple, simple. Shouldn't take long. So please try to upload and for the faculty that are still with us in today's meeting, encourage your students to do this by Friday. It would help us a lot. Thanks so much. And if anyone has any questions about that, we're happy to answer them.
There's one thing that's come up. Karen's already mentioned this. She mentioned it in her presentation even, that she has a PDF. Like it's a PDF document. I'm wondering if we could, is there a way to embed a PDF? One question. And then the other thing I'm wondering about is the demands. I noticed there's one more than the AHA demands. Should we have a field for filling in demands, other demands?
We certainly could. We would have to ask Ali to make that modification, but we absolutely could do that. And in regards to the PDF, I think we'd have to circle back with. Right now, we've asked for. So Adrian, Karen's question is if an image, whatever that image may be, is in a PDF format.
I mean, the other thing that I talked about with her is that it's possible that the spreads could be images. So you could just take each spread and upload it as an image.
100%, 100%.
Maybe.
I mean, I think everyone's free to. I mean, we've tended on because we've tended to think of the images as not having much text in them, right? To be kind of floor plans or perspective views. But of course, we've seen such a wonderful diversity of work today, and obviously there are some courses that aren't studios per se in an architectural traditional sense, like Rob's at TMU. So I think each course could take some liberty in what they think are images that best represent the work. Thus far, it's easiest for Ali organizing the website if the images are in the prescribed formats. Mauricio.
Yes, thank Matthew. I mean, I don't want to, step on anybody's toes, but I think if the main objective is to have an online exhibition, I think personally I will encourage my students to just save things as a as an image. That's easily done in just open Photoshop and save it as. If you have to upload a PDF as a student, and that means that will probably have to be translated into an image before it's put in an online gallery. So I think I will suggest that it might be just easy enough to ask the students to do that, that translation of format.
Yeah, I think I agree with what you're saying, Mauricio. I think we should approach it that way. Yeah. Super. We look forward to receiving the work and putting it into an exciting website. We will be sure to announce it and send the link when it is ready.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks everyone. It was so great to see all the good work from this semester. Have
So
a nice end of year.
we'll be sending out a lecture series schedule shortly. It's pretty much ready, almost getting close. And we will have our winter term launch on Thursday, January 8th. Timing still maybe is being finessed. Somewhere around between 12:30 and 1:30 will be the start. We will send that out shortly.
Eastern time, you mean?
Yes, Eastern time. Apologies. Yeah.
Thanks so much, everybody. What fantastic, exciting work.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.